It all started on a quiet Saturday morning. The kind where the sun hits your driveway just right and everything feels peaceful. My vintage truck, a gleaming 1967 Chevrolet C10, sat in my driveway like a trophy I'd painstakingly restored over the last 5 years. Its polished chrome reflected the morning light, and the rumble of its engine was like music to my ears. Little did I know, that same morning would turn into one of the most stressful and bizarre experiences of my life. I had just finished a cup of coffee and was wiping down the last smudges on the truck when I noticed movement across the street. A woman I'd only met once before. Karen from the HOA was marching toward me with a determined glare, clipboard in hand. Karen had a reputation for being difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. Her lips were pressed tight, her eyes narrowed, and her finger was already pointing at my truck as if she had declared war on it. "Your truck violates HOA rules," she barked before I could even greet her. "You're parking an unauthorized vehicle on the property." Her voice was sharp, almost triumphant, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. I froze for a second, partly because of her intensity, but mostly because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Violate HOA rules? My truck had been parked there for years without any complaints. What had triggered this sudden attack? Karen wasn't alone. 2 HOA enforcers, if you could call them that, were with her, clipboard wielding and ready to act. They approached my truck like they were about to seize a criminal's evidence. My heart raced, and a surge of anger mixed with disbelief flooded through me. This was ridiculous. My vintage truck was not just a vehicle. It was a piece of history, a labor of love, and she wanted to take it? Before things could escalate, I calmly reached into my jacket and pulled out something that changed everything. My FBI badge. The moment it caught the sunlight, their confidence faltered. Karen's eyes widened, and her smug smirk vanished almost instantly. The enforcers stepped back, hesitant, unsure what to do next. I could see the realization hitting Karen. She had underestimated me. This was no ordinary homeowner dispute. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady but firm. "I suggest you think very carefully before trying to take this truck," I said, letting the badge gleam in the morning sun. There was a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of my truck's engine. Karen's face turned red, a mix of anger and embarrassment. The whole situation teetered on the edge of chaos. This was just the beginning of what would become the most unforgettable showdown I've ever experienced with an HOA. And, trust me, what happened next was completely unexpected. Karen's face was a mix of fury and disbelief as she took a hesitant step back. The HOA enforcers mirrored her hesitation, glancing at one another like lost puppies unsure how to handle a situation far beyond their authority. The badge in my hand wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of power, experience, and consequences they weren't prepared to face. For a moment, the quiet suburban street felt charged with tension, like a scene from a movie about a small-town showdown. You can't just flaunt that!" Karen stammered, her usual confidence shattered. Her voice cracked under the weight of her surprise, and I realized she had assumed this would be an easy, victorious confrontation. They thought they were in control, ready to enforce rules without consequences. But now, the balance had shifted, and she was struggling to find a footing. I remained calm, letting the silence hang in the air. My truck gleamed beside me, the chrome catching the sunlight in a way that made it look untouchable. I knew this was my moment to assert control without escalating further. "Karen, I suggest you step back and reconsider your actions," I said slowly, deliberately. Every word was meant to diffuse the situation while making it crystal clear. This wasn't a bluff. She muttered something under her breath, something about rules and bylaws, but it lacked conviction. The enforcers shifted uneasily, glancing at her for guidance. Karen's usual sense of authority had evaporated, leaving her grasping at fragments of what she thought was power. It was obvious. She had never encountered resistance like this before. Then, as if to regain some semblance of dominance, Karen pointed at my truck again. "I'm calling the HOA board. They'll make you remove this vehicle immediately." Her voice rose, dripping with desperation. It was the classic Karen move, intimidation through escalation. But this time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled calmly and tapped the badge. "Call them all you want. They'll get the same message you just did. I'm not moving this truck." A tense pause followed. You could see the gears turning in Karen's head as she weighed her options. She realized this wasn't just about HOA bylaws anymore. It was about judgment, authority, and consequences. The enforcers started to back off, clearly questioning whether they wanted any part of this standoff. It was a delicate dance of power, and I held every step. Finally, Karen's shoulders slumped slightly. Her anger now mingled with frustration, but she wasn't done yet. I could tell she was already plotting her next move, desperate to regain the upper hand. This wasn't over. and deep down, I knew the situation would escalate before it ended. What happened next would push this standoff into completely uncharted territory, one that neither Karen nor I would forget anytime soon. Karen's eyes darted around nervously as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. Her confidence had crumbled, replaced with a mix of panic and determination. This was the moment where you could see a Karen fully exposed, her rules are law, facade slipping under pressure. She had tried intimidation, she had tried threats, but none of it had the slightest effect on me or my vintage truck. And that's when things started to escalate. "I don't care who you are!" Karen shouted, waving her clipboard like it was some sort of weapon. "This truck cannot stay here! I'm calling for immediate action!" Her voice echoed down the street, drawing the attention of a few neighbors who were now peeking from behind, curtains and over fences. The suburban calm had completely evaporated, replaced by the tension of a standoff that looked more like a showdown in an action movie than a simple HOA dispute. I stayed calm, letting her energy crash into my steadiness. My hand rested lightly on the badge in my pocket, not as a threat, but as a reminder that I had authority she couldn't even begin to challenge. "Karen," I said slowly, deliberately, "this isn't a negotiation. The truck stays. You've already seen what happens when you try to enforce rules recklessly." Her face flushed red, her words catching in her throat. The enforcers beside her began exchanging uneasy glances, silently asking themselves how they had gotten involved in something clearly above their pay grade. You could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, realizing this was no longer just an HOA disagreement. It had become a high-stakes game of power, authority, and ego. Desperation finally took over Karen's actions. She stomped closer to my truck, clipboard raised, and attempted to physically mark it as in violation, hoping that an assertive gesture would intimidate me into compliance. But the moment she stepped closer, I calmly held up my badge, letting the sunlight catch it. Her momentum halted instantly. It was as if time had paused for a split second. The audacity of her move met with undeniable authority. "Step back," I said firmly, my voice echoing in the quiet street. "One more step and you'll regret it. This isn't a game." The energy shifted. Karen hesitated, her face contorted with frustration. She had tried everything, threats, intimidation, gestures of authority, but nothing had worked. And in that moment it became painfully clear. She was no longer in control. The enforcers slowly retreated, and Karen was left standing there fuming, powerless. But even though she had been frozen in place, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen doesn't give up easily. The next move she made would determine whether the showdown ended with her saving face or completely losing it. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face a mix of anger, frustration, and disbelief. I could almost see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to regain control after being completely outmaneuvered. The enforcers had quietly backed away, no longer willing to confront me or my vintage truck. The street was silent, except for the soft hum of my engine, and the occasional murmur of curious neighbors, peeking out from behind their blinds. It was a tense calm, the kind that comes right before a storm. Or, in this case, a resolution. You can't just do this," Karen muttered, finally finding her voice. Her words were shaky now, lacking the confidence she had carried just minutes before. She tried to assert authority one last time, tapping her clipboard against her palm, but it was more desperate than threatening. The badge in my hand gleamed under the sun, a subtle reminder that I wasn't an ordinary homeowner and this wasn't an ordinary dispute. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Karen, the truck stays. You've seen what happens when you push too far. I suggest you leave before this escalates." Further, I could see the wheels turning in her head. This was the crossroads moment for her ego. Retreat and save face, or push forward and risk embarrassment or worse. For a few long seconds she didn't respond. I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat. Then, slowly, she lowered her clipboard. Her eyes flicked nervously between the truck, the badge, and the enforcers, who were now clearly ready to exit the scene. Fine," she muttered, finally conceding, though her pride was clearly bruised. "This isn't over," she added, more as a warning to herself than to me. And just like that, the standoff ended. Karen turned on her heel and marched back down the street, her enforcers following silently. The tension evaporated as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me standing beside my vintage truck, victorious but still catching my breath. Neighbors emerged from their homes, offering congratulatory smiles or whispers of astonishment at what had just unfolded. It was surreal. One moment, a normal morning. The next, a dramatic confrontation with a Karen from the HOA that no one would forget. I leaned against my truck, reflecting on the entire ordeal. It wasn't just about protecting a vehicle. It was about standing firm, asserting authority, and knowing when to hold your ground. The badge had done more than just stop. Karen. It had reminded everyone involved that respect and boundaries matter, and that sometimes, even the boldest attempts to intimidate can be turned into lessons in humility. By the end of the day, the truck remained untouched, and Karen had learned a lesson in overreach. And as I fired up the engine, the sound of that rumbling, V8 felt sweeter than ever. Proof that sometimes standing firm is worth every tense moment. If you enjoyed this wild HOA showdown, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss another crazy story. Drop a like if you think Karen went too far, and comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever faced a neighbor like this? I want to hear your story.